I had been a captain for 19 years before the morning the sky over Cheney split open, and even now, in a quiet room far from any sun, I cannot tell the story without my hands going cold. The cold is a small thing. I keep it because it is the only honest piece of me that survived the patrol. Everything else, the rank, the citations, the ship I no longer command, those were given back to me by men in clean uniforms who needed someone to stand at a podium. The cold I earned myself. We called our ship Pendragon. She was a long-range survey cutter, not a warship, though by the end she had taken more rounds than most warships ever see. The hull was the dull gray of a winter sea. The bridge smelled always of recycled air, and the slightly burnt coffee my comms officer brewed too hot because he was from a colony where everything tasted of iron. I had a crew of 6. Hugo, my first officer, who had been with me longer than my wife had been alive. The youngest, a quiet kid with a scar across his chest and a handheld drone controller he treated like a relic. Haruna at navigation, Oki at engineering, Kumano on guns, and a maintenance unit we all called Cheney, an old pattern combat android we had stripped down and rebuilt twice, until she was more our hands than her manufacturers. She did not have a face. She had a sensor strip and a voice that sounded like a tired schoolteacher, and she was the most reliable thing on the ship. We had been ordered to investigate a distress signal at the edge of charted space. The signal was old, the kind of old that meant the people who sent it were no longer worried about anything. We had taken 6 weeks to reach the coordinates. By the time we slipped out of fold drive into normal space, I had read the brief so many times I could recite the survey codes in my sleep. Planet, designation withheld, unsurveyed. Atmosphere breathable but thin. Magnetic field unstable. No registered colonies. The signal was a beacon, automated, looping a single line in an old human dialect I had not heard since my grandmother's funeral. Translated, it said, "Do not come here, but if you have come, please come." I should have turned the ship around. I want that on the record. I want the men and women who read these pages to know I considered it. I considered it for the length of a slow breath, looking at the planet on my view screen, a gray-brown ball with a scab of dark cloud across its northern hemisphere, and I felt something old and tired in me say no. And then I gave the order to make orbit because that is what captains do. We answer the call. We tell ourselves the cost is the price of the uniform. The planet had a name in the old charts, Cheney. I do not know who named it. I never met a man who could tell me. We came down through a cloud layer that flickered green from inside, as if something below was throwing lightning at the sky, and the lightning had a rhythm, the kind of rhythm a heart has when it is trying not to stop. Haruna said, very quietly, that the magnetic readings did not match any planet she had been trained to read. Oki said the fold drive was showing residual flux, as if we had passed through more than one boundary on the way down. Ray did not say anything. He stood at his station with one hand on the scar at his chest, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who has heard a door close in his sleep. We landed on a black plain north of the lightning. The ground was the color of old iron. There were no trees, there were no birds. There were structures on the horizon, towers I thought at first, though they did not look quite like any tower I had ever surveyed. They were too straight and they leaned a little, like things growing rather than things built. I told Hugo to keep the engines warm. I told Kumano to track the towers with the bow cannon. I told Ray and Cheney to come with me on the ground sweep, and I left Haruna and Oki on the bridge with the seal locked. The air tasted of static. I have walked the surface of 19 unsurveyed planets, and not one of them tasted like that one did. It was the taste a man's mouth gets when a fuse is about to blow. Ray walked beside me with his drone controller clipped to his belt and his rifle across his chest, and he did not speak for a long while, and then he said, "Captain, I want to be honest with you, my chest is hurting." He said it the way a man reports a system fault. I told him to fall back to the ship. He shook his head very small and said, "No, sir, it is not pain, it is recognition," and I did not understand what he meant until later, when there was no longer time to ask. We had walked perhaps 2 kilometers from the Pendragon when Jeannie's sensor strip went red and she said in her tired voice, "Contact bearing 040 descending." I looked up. The sky above the black plane had been the color of wet ash. Now there was a shape coming down through it, a shape with the silhouette of a man, except the man was the size of a building, and the man was burning at the edges. He came down slowly, the way a leaf comes down, except a leaf does not crack the ground when it lands. I want to describe what I saw, and I want to be careful, because in 19 years I have learned that the eye lies when the heart is running too fast. The figure who stood on the plane in front of us was humanoid. He was tall, call it 40 meters, 50. I never got a clean number. His body was silver and crimson, lit from inside as if there were a furnace under the skin. He had a crest on his head that looked like a blade. His eyes were two yellow lamps, and they were looking past us, not at us, the way a man looks at a problem he has not yet finished. He did not speak. He raised one hand and made a gesture I did not understand, and Cheney said, "Captain, that gesture is a warning. I do not know how I know." And then the towers on the horizon began to fire. The first bolt of lightning that came from those towers was not lightning. It was the color of lightning, and it moved like lightning, but it had a sound at the end of it that lightning does not have, a long, low ringing, like a bell that has been struck underwater. The bolt did not hit the burning man. It went past him. It struck a point on the plane perhaps 100 meters to his left, and the air at the strike point folded, and out of the fold stepped 4 more figures. I want you to understand what I am telling you. The 4 figures who came out of the air looked exactly like the burning man, not similar, the same crest, the same colored armor, the same shape. They were copies. They were not copies of him. They were a little different in the way one brother is different from another. One was red and silver broader. One was blue. One was white with black trim. One was something between, with eyes the same yellow lamps as the first. They came out of the fold, and they did not look at us either. They looked at him, and even from 2 kilometers back, on the black ground of a planet I had no business being on, I understood that I was watching a family meeting that had gone very wrong. The first of them, the broad red one, opened his hands and threw fire. Real fire, the kind you can feel on your face from a kilometer away. The burning man rolled under it. He came up with a movement that no body that big should have been able to make, and he hit the red one across the chest, and the red one staggered, and that was the moment I realized something that has not let me sleep properly in the years since. The burning man's strikes did not sound like the others. His hits had a meat sound. The others sounded hollow, like striking the side of a tank. Ray said, "Captain, those 4 are not real." I asked him how he could possibly know. He said, "My chest is colder when I look at them." I want you to remember that line. I want you to remember that a young man with a scar told me the truth before any of my instruments did. I called Hugo on the suit comm. I told him we had a situation. I told him to lift the Pendragon to low altitude and put the bow gun on the towers. He acknowledged. The line went very quiet for perhaps 3 seconds, and then the line went silent the way a line goes silent when the other end has stopped existing. I said his name twice. The third time, I did not say it, because Jeannie's sensor strip had turned a color I had never seen her use before, and she said, in a voice that was not the tired schoolteacher's anymore but something thinner, "Captain, the Pendragon is under attack." We ran. I am 61 years old, and I ran across 2 kilometers of black plain in low gravity with a rifle bouncing on my back, and I did not feel my knees, and I did not feel my lungs, because over the horizon in the direction of my ship, a 6th figure had appeared in the sky. He had not come out of the air the way the others had. He had simply been there, suddenly. And he was descending on the Pendragon the way a man steps on an ant. This 6th figure was different from the 4 copies. He looked older. His armor had a heavier line to it. His weapon was a blade on the side of his head, a curved blade that he removed from himself the way a man unsheathes a knife. And there was no warmth in him at all. The 4 copies were violence. He was procedure. I have, since that day, tried many times to describe what it is like to watch a thing the size of a building destroy a ship the size of a city block. Words do not do it. The hull buckled. Not the way metal buckles when it is struck. the way wet paper buckles when it is folded. The bow cannon, Kumano's cannon, the cannon I had told him to lay on those towers, fired once, a clean line of light, and the older figure simply moved his head, and the light went past him, and then he brought the blade across the Pendragon's spine, and my ship opened up like a fish on a cutting board. I saw Haruna fall out of the breach. I am sure I saw her. I have replayed it in my head until I no longer trust the replay. She was tumbling, and she was very small, and she did not scream because her suit had already torn. She had a daughter on a station I had visited twice. The daughter was 9. The daughter sent her mother a recording every Sunday, and Haruna played the recordings on the bridge speakers when she thought I was not on the bridge, except I was always on the bridge, and I always heard, and I never told her I heard, because the recordings were the only thing that kept Haruna's hand steady on the long passages, and a captain learns which kindnesses to keep quiet. I keep her face in a place where I do not have to look at it often. I owe her that much. Oki survived the breach. I know because I heard him on the comm, just for a moment, swearing in his colony dialect, and then a second voice on the comm, clearer, calmer. His voice, when something on the engine deck had gone properly wrong, said, "Captain, the third coolant loop is open, and I am going to seal it, and I will not be on the comm again." He said it the way a man tells you he is going to step outside for a smoke. He had a wife on his colony. He had 3 boys, the youngest of whom had not yet learned to walk, and Oki had a photograph taped to the inside of his locker that I had pretended not to see 12 times. He sealed the loop. I heard the loop seal. The seal held for 40 seconds, which was 40 seconds more than the loop should have given him, which was 40 seconds we did not have to use on the radiation alarm. And then Jeannie's strip went a quieter red, and she said, "Captain, Engineer Oki has gone offline." She said it gently. She always said it gently. That was the part of her programming we had never been able to make harder. Kumano made it to an escape capsule. I know that because the capsule came out of the Pendragon as she was dying, and I saw it go. He was the youngest of my senior crew. He had only just earned the gunner's stripe. He had asked me, the night before we made orbit, whether I thought the bow cannon was up to the survey job, and I had told him, lying gently, that the cannon was the finest piece of equipment on the ship. The cannon was, in fact, a recommissioned piece of ordnance from a war I had fought as a younger man, and Kumano had known it, and he had asked the question anyway, because he was the kind of young man who needs to be told a thing twice before he is allowed to believe it. The capsule came out of the Pendragon on its proper trajectory. Kumano had fired the capsule correctly. He had done his job. The capsule trailed a thin line of fuel as it fell, and the fuel was the part Kumano could not have fixed, because the line had been hit before he reached the capsule, and the fuel ignited, and Kumano did not get to the ground the way a man gets to the ground. I stopped running. I stopped because there was nothing left to run to. The Pendragon was burning on the plain ahead of me, and the older figure with the curved blade was already turning his head slowly, the way a hunter turns when he has heard a smaller thing breathing in the grass. Ray was beside me. Jeannie was beside me. We had 2 rifles between us and a maintenance android with a strip that had gone, by then, a very dark red. The burning man, the first one, the one who had come down through the ash sky, was still fighting his 4 copies on our flank. He had taken hits. One of his crest blades was bent. He was bleeding if a being of light bleeds. There was a brightness on his shoulder that was not the brightness of the rest of him, and the brightness was leaking, and the ground under it was hissing. He saw us. He saw us across 2 kilometers of burning ground, and he made a sound, not a word, not a language any of my crew was trained in, but a sound. And the sound, somehow, was meant for me. I want to tell you that I understood the sound. I did not. I understood only that he had seen us, and that he had decided we were not to be killed yet, and that decision cost him. The blue copy hit him while his head was turned. The hit took him to one knee. And I, 61 years old, watching the only ally I had on that plane go down because he had spent a heartbeat acknowledging us, I felt something old and ugly come up in me. I felt the part of me that had stood at podiums and read the names of dead crew and said the proper words. I felt that part of me sit down, and something else stood up. Something my wife, before she left me, called the bad version. The version of me that does not stop because stopping is not in the manual. I told Ray to put his drone controller in my hand. He had not used it on a planet in 3 years. He had told me once in a bar on a station I no longer remember that the controller called something that he had not let himself call since the day he got the scar. He did not argue with me. He put it in my hand. The controller was heavier than I expected. The grip had a depression for a thumb that was not mine. I gave it back to him. I said, "You call it." He looked at me for a long second. Then he closed his hand around it, and he did something with his thumb that I did not see clearly, and the ground under our feet shook. I have been on a planet during an earthquake. I have been on a station during a hull breach decompression. I have been in a fold drive when the field collapsed. None of those compare to what came out of the ground when Ray put his thumb on that controller. A shape pushed up through the black plane 100 meters from where we stood. It pushed up slowly at first and then very fast, and when it stood, it was a body, a creature, an animal shape taller than the Pendragon had been, scaled in dark plates with a horn on its forehead and a tail like a thrown chain. It put its head back and it screamed. The sound of it was not alien. That is the strange part. The sound of it was older than alien. It was the sound of something that had been on the wrong side of human history and had decided, somewhere along the way, to take a contract. Ray said his name is Gamora. I told him to point Gamora at the towers. He said, "Sir, I am pointing him at the figure with the blade." I said, "No, the towers first, or the figure with the blade does not run out of copies." Ray did not answer, but Gamora turned slowly on the plane and faced the towers and began to walk. And the older figure with the curved blade, who had been turning his head toward us, stopped and turned the whole of his body toward Gamora, and I realized too late, the way you realize most things on a planet like that the older figure had not been built to fight monsters. He had been built to fight men in armor. He looked, for the first time, uncertain. The burning man saw it too. He was still on one knee and his copies were closing on him, but he saw the older figure pause and he understood, the way a soldier understands when his enemy has been distracted, that he had been given a heartbeat. He used it. He came up off his knee with a movement that I want very much to describe properly. He came up the way a man comes up out of a punch he was not supposed to take. The red copy hit him. He took it. He took it the way a man takes a hit he has decided will not knock him down. And then he hit the red copy back, in the throat hollow of its armor, and the red copy folded, and there was a sound from inside it, a clattering, mechanical sound, that was not the sound a body makes. It was the sound a machine makes when its frame has gone out of true. The red copy fell, and it did not get up, and from the place where the burning man had struck it, a kind of black smoke poured out, the color of an old oil fire. Ray said, "Captain, they are not flesh. None of them are flesh. The burning man is, the others are not." I looked at the 4-3 now copies. They had not reacted to the death of their brother. They had not slowed. They had not even looked. They were continuing the attack pattern they had been running. I had seen that kind of behavior before in old training simulations, when the simulated enemy is a thing that does not feel its own losses. I had not seen it in the field, not in a thing that wore the shape of a man. And then I understood not all of it, not yet, but enough, what the 4 copies were. They were not allies of the burning man. They were not even enemies in the way I had been trained to understand enemies. They were tools. They were tools that had been built to wear the face of someone the burning man knew. Someone he could not bring himself to fight at full strength because of the shape. They had been built to put a hand on the part of him that would not raise a fist against a brother. That is the part of this story that I think about most. I want you to sit with it for a moment, the way I have had to sit with it. They were not trying to kill the burning man with strength. They were trying to kill him with hesitation. They were a weapon made of grief. The older figure with the blade, the procedural one, the cold one, finally moved. He did not run at Gamora, he flew. He came across the plain in a long, low arc, and he came down on Gamora's shoulders with both hands locked around the curved blade, and he drove the blade down into the spine plates between Gamora's shoulder blades, and Gamora screamed again, and this time the scream was wet. Ray made a sound I had never heard him make. He stepped forward. I caught his arm. I told him, hold the line. He said, sir, he is hurting Gamora. I said, he is supposed to be hurting Gamora. That is what we paid for. Do not waste it. I am not proud of the line. I want it in the record anyway. There is a kind of captain you become on a day like that, and the kind you become says hard things to keep the young from running into a fire. Gamora did not die. He bent under the blade. He bent the way a load-bearing beam bends when something has finally exceeded its rating, and you can hear the joint at the top of the beam, and you can see the line of dust come down from the ceiling, and you know the beam is going to give, but you also know the beam is going to give a little later than the thing pressing on it expected. Gamora gave a little later. He turned his head very slowly, and he closed his jaws on the older figure's wrist, and he pulled. The blade came out of his spine. The wrist came with it. The older figure did not scream. He did not make any sound at all. He simply stopped and looked at the wrist that was no longer at the end of his arm, and a black smoke came out of the cut, the same smoke as had come out of the red copy. Ray said, very quietly, Captain, that one is not flesh either. I said, I know. The burning man was on his feet again. He had used the moment we had bought him. He had put his hand into the chest of the white and black copy and torn something out, and the copy had folded, and the blue copy had stepped back. I will swear on any oath you ask of me that the blue copy stepped back, that for half a heartbeat that machine knew it was running out of brothers. And then the burning man hit the blue copy across the throat hollow, the same place he had hit the red one, and the blue copy fell. 3 of the 4 were down. The last one, the one with the yellow lamp eyes, the one that had looked the most like the burning man, was the one he could not bring himself to finish. I watched him try. I watched a being of light raise a hand twice and lower it twice, and on the third raise he turned his face away and he struck, and the strike was clean, and the last copy fell, and the burning man did not look back at where it had landed. He did not look at us either. He was looking instead at the older figure with the missing wrist, the procedural one, the cold one. And the cold one looked back at him, and for the first time the cold one spoke. The voice that came out of the cold one was not a voice. It was a transmission, a signal, the kind of broadcast a base camp sends when the patrol has gone too far out. The signal was a word, and the word was a name, and the name was not in any language I had been trained in, but I understood it the way Ray had understood his chest, because some things are not heard with the ears. The name was the older figure's own. He was identifying himself. He was telling the burning man and us by accident what he was called. Jeannie translated. I do not know how. She was running on a charge that should have been long gone. She said the broadcast is a designation. It says Darklips, iteration 0. I said the word back to her. She said, Captain, the designation includes a maker's mark. The maker's mark is one we have on file. The mark is older than the war. The mark is from a faction we believe to be defunct. I did not ask her which faction. I did not need to. Every captain in the Long-Range Survey Corps knows the marks of the factions we believe to be defunct. There were 3 of them. 2 of them I could have lived with. The third was the one that had taken my older brother. I will not tell you the name. The name is in a file you can request. I will not put it in this account. The name has been used as a curse in my family for 40 years, and I do not want to use it again here. I will only tell you what the mark meant. The mark meant the towers on the horizon had not been built by the 4 copies. The mark meant the 4 copies had not been built by the older figure with the blade. The mark meant something farther up the chain than any of them. Something patient, something with hands at the controls of all of it, had decided, a long time ago, that the burning man and his kind were the next problem on a list. The mark meant we had walked into the testing ground for a weapon that was meant for a war we had not yet been told about. The older figure, the one Cheney had called Darklips Iteration 0, did not move for a long second after the broadcast. The Burning Man did not move either. They were measuring each other. I have seen old wolves do it in nature footage, on planets where there were still wolves. The two of them stood on that black plain, and the wind picked up, and the dust came across the ground in long, thin lines, and somewhere far behind us the Pendragon was still burning, and I thought, this is a fight I am not equipped to watch. I was wrong. I was equipped. So was Ray. So was Cheney. We were equipped because we were not the fight. We were the witnesses. We were the people who would carry the story off the planet if the Burning Man fell, and the older figure knew it. He turned his head slowly, the way he turned everything, and he looked at the three of us, the captain and the kid and the maintenance android, and he made a decision that I have replayed many times. He decided we were not worth killing first. He decided to finish the Burning Man, and then come for us. It was the only mistake he made. I want that in the record too. The older figure, the cold one, the procedural one, the patient one, made one mistake on the plane of Cheney, and the mistake was deciding that the captain of a dead survey ship, a kid with a controller, and an old combat android with a tired voice could be killed second. The Burning Man went at him. He went the way a man goes at someone who has hurt his brothers, even false brothers, even tools wearing the faces of brothers, because the faces had been real once and the man had loved them. He hit the older figure across the chest. The older figure took it. The two of them went into the dust, and the dust went up in a column that I could see from where I stood, and the column had shapes inside it, hands and crests and the curved blade, and I could not tell, from outside the column, who was winning. I told Ray to bring Gamora forward. Gamora was bleeding, the same way the Burning Man bled, except more and slower, and there was a sound in his breathing that I did not like. Ray moved his thumb on the controller. Gamora took one step toward the dust column, then another. Then he stopped. He stopped because the dust column came apart and the Burning Man was on his back, and the older figure was standing over him with the curved blade in his remaining hand. I want to tell you what I did next. I am not proud of it. I want it in the record because I do not want it forgotten. I picked up Ray's rifle. I took the rifle off his shoulder because his hands were on the controller and he could not spare them, and I aimed at the older figure, who was 40 meters tall and had a blade the size of my ship's mast, and I fired. I fired the whole magazine. I fired 30 rounds of small arms munitions at a creature for whom a small arm was less than a mosquito. I did not fire because I thought I could hurt him. I fired because the Burning Man was on his back, and the older figure was about to bring the blade down, and I needed the older figure to look at me. Just for a second. Just long enough to lose his place. He looked at me. He turned his head, the same slow turn, the same procedure, and he looked at the small gray-haired man on the black ground with the empty rifle, and he paused. He paused for 1 second, maybe 2. It was enough. The Burning Man came up off his back. He came up with the part of him that bled, the bright leaking part, the shoulder that was emptying itself, and he drove that part, the wound itself, into the older figure's chest. Light went into the older figure. The older figure took the light. The light kept going. It went through the chest plate and it went into whatever was inside the chest plate, and the older figure made his first sound. Not a scream. A noise like a server room when the cooling fails. A long drapping hum. The older figure fell to one knee. The curved blade came down on the plane beside him, useless because the hand that held it had gone slack. The Burning Man pushed himself up. He stood over the older figure. He did not strike again. He stood there, breathing, looking down at the procedural one, and for the first time I saw something in the Burning Man that I had not seen before. I saw a tired face. Or rather, I saw the place where, if his face had been a face, a tired one would have been. He was old, too. He was younger than me by a number of years that did not fit on any chart I had been trained to read. And he was old, too. The way old means when you have been doing the same hard thing for longer than the universe expected you to. The older figure raised what was left of his arm. He pointed with the stump of the wrist at the towers on the horizon. Then his hand dropped. Then a piece of his chest fell off and rolled in the dust. He did not move again. But he was not dead. I want to be very clear about this. He was not dead. He had been damaged. The thing inside him, the procedure, was still running. We knew because his eyes, the two yellow lamps, were still lit. They were lit a little dimmer, but they were lit. Cheney said, "Captain, the broadcast is continuing. It has changed. It is calling for evacuation." I said, "Evacuation of what?" She said, "Of itself." She said, "The procedure has issued a self-recovery order. There is a window inside it. The window is large. The window includes a self-destruct." She paused and she said, "Captain, the self-destruct is calibrated to the planet." I did not understand at first. Then I did. Then I wished I had not. The procedural one, the iteration 0, the Darklips, had been built with a fallback. If he could not finish the job, he would take the job with him. He would take the towers. He would take the planet. He would take us and the Burning Man and Gamora and anything else that had been on Cheney when the procedure failed. He would take it all, and he would call it a draw. I told Ray to call Gamora back. Ray did not move. He was watching the Burning Man, who was watching the procedural one, who was watching nothing now, because the yellow lamps had gone dim enough to be embers. I want you to understand the situation we were in. The Pendragon was a hulk. Her drives were dead. Her hull was open. 3 of my 6 were gone. The 4th, Hugo, my first officer, I did not yet know about. The 2 who were left, Ray and Cheney, were standing on a planet that had been ordered to die. We had no ride home. We had a Burning Man who had just spent everything he had to put down a thing that was not yet finished. We had a monster Ray had called from underground who was bleeding from the spine. We had 3 rifles, 2 of them empty, and a controller, and a maintenance android with a strip going dimmer, and we had each other. I am 61 years old. I have seen a lot of last stands. The thing about last stands is that they are usually short. The thing about last stands is that they are usually decided by who flinches. And the thing the procedural one, the Darklips, the iteration 0, had not understood when he turned his head and chose to kill us second, was that we did not flinch on that plane because we had nothing left to flinch from. We had already lost the ship. We had already lost the crew. We had already lost the day. The only thing left to lose was the witness, and we were not going to lose that. Even if we died, the Burning Man would carry it. Even if the Burning Man died, the planet itself would carry it, in the scar it was about to take. The witness was going to get off Cheney. The witness was going to find a desk somewhere with a faction mark in a file, and the witness was going to make a phone call, and that phone call was going to make a war. I told Hugo in my head that I was sorry. I told Haruna that I was sorry. I told Oki and Kumano and the wife who had left me, and the brother who had been taken by the faction that built the procedural one. I told them all the same thing in the same line, and the line was, "I am going to live long enough to bring the file." The Burning Man turned to us. He came down the plane in long strides. He had not slept, I think, in a longer time than I had been alive. He stopped in front of the 3 of us. He was taller than the Pendragon had been. He had a face, after all, I had been wrong about that. He had a face the size of a small house, and there was a kindness in it, a particular kindness, the kindness of a being who has just used the last of himself to keep a smaller thing alive. He bent down. He put one hand on the ground beside us, palm up. The palm was as wide as a road. He said in a voice that did not use my ears, "The planet has very little time. Get on." Ray got on first. He climbed onto the palm with the controller still in his hand, and Gamora, who was bleeding from the spine and breathing like a wet bellows, came up behind us. Ray made a motion with his thumb. Gamora went down into the ground, not killed, sent home. The ground closed over him. Ray put the controller into his pocket. I have not seen him use it since. Cheney climbed up next. She did not need a hand. Her servos were old, but they had been ours for a long time. She paused halfway up and she said, "Captain, I am going to ask you a question and I would like you to answer truthfully." I said, "Ask." She said, "Captain, if I do not make it off this planet, will you write the letter properly?" She meant the letter we write when a crew member dies, the letter we send to the next of kin, the letter she did not have any next of kin to receive. She meant, would I file her properly, would I list her as crew, would I put her in the record beside Haruna and Oki and Kumano? I said yes. I will write it properly. She nodded, the small clean nod she always gave, and she climbed the rest of the way up. I climbed last. The palm was warm. I had not expected that. It was warm the way a stone is warm after it has been in the sun all day. The burning man closed his fingers around us, loose, the way a man closes his fingers around a small animal he does not want to crush, and he stood up, and the plane dropped away. He flew straight up, and the wind was very cold and very loud, and I could not see anything except the inside of his hand, which was lit faintly the way a paper lantern is lit. We went up through the ash cloud. The ash cloud was thick. We went up through the green flickering layer, and the flickering passed across the burning man's fingers in patterns I do not have words for. We came out above the cloud. The sky above the cloud was almost black. There were stars in it. There were many more stars than there should have been, in patterns I did not recognize, and Cheney said, very quietly, Captain, those are not our stars. I said, I know. We crossed the upper atmosphere. The burning man flew the way nothing the size of a building should fly. He flew the way a thought flies, the way a memory flies, the way a man flies in the last second of a dream. And below us on the planet the towers began to flash, not the green lightning we had seen on the way down, a whiter flash, a faster one. The towers were the countdown. The towers were the procedural ones self-destruct, finally being run. The burning man flew faster. He flew past a moon I had not seen on any chart. He flew past a string of debris that might have been an old battle, or an old mining yard, or an old graveyard. I did not look closely. He flew until the planet behind us was a coin, and the coin had a white flare growing on its dark side. And then the coin had two flares, and then the coin became a flare itself. And then the flare passed through our position and shook the burning man, and his hand opened a little, and I saw the dying light of Cheney pass across our faces. He did not let us go. I want to say that. He did not flinch. His hand had opened a little because the shockwave had hit him, but he closed his hand again, and he kept flying. And after a long time the flare behind us faded to a coal, and the coal cooled, and there was no more Cheney. There was, in its place, a region of space that on any chart afterward was marked with the symbol that means do not enter, and beside the symbol there was a number, and the number was the planet's old name, and the name was Cheney, and the name had a small line drawn through it, the way the names of the dead are drawn through in the logs. He carried us a long way. I do not know how far. Time on his hand did not move the way time should move. I think I slept, although Ray told me later that I had not. I think I dreamed, although there are no images I can put my hand on. There was, instead, a slow turning, as if the inside of my head had been put on a wheel and the wheel was being walked by a creature very far away. Jeannie's strip went a steady amber, which was her resting color, and her voice went quiet, and she did not speak for a long while. When I asked her later what she had been doing in that long quiet, she said she had been writing the letter for herself, in case, so that I would not have to. I asked her on the palm why she had asked me to write it. She said, Captain, you have written 11 of them in 19 years, and you have written them all well, and I would like mine to be in the same hand. I said, you are an android. She said, yes. I said, the regulations do not require the letter for an android. She said, Captain, I know what the regulations require. I am asking for what is right. I did not have an answer. I had not had an answer for a long time on the subject of what Cheney was. We had stripped her down twice. We had put parts of ourselves into her, Oki's wiring on her left arm, Huga's old service grip on her right, my own voice patterns in her speech buffer because the original had been corrupted on a salvage run 6 years before. She was a maintenance android. She was also, in some small and inarguable way, ours. I had not noticed when she had become ours. I think it had been a long time. I said, I will write it. She said, "Thank you, Captain." Then she went quiet again, and her strip stayed amber, and I sat on the warm palm of a being who did not have a name I could say, and I tried very hard not to think about Haruna's daughter. Ray did not speak on the flight either. He sat with his back to one of the fingers, and he held the controller loose in his lap, and his eyes were open but unfocused. And once, only once, he said, "My chest is not cold anymore." He said it the way a man reports a fever has broken. He said it the way a man tells you the bleeding has stopped. He said it the way Oki had said the third coolant loop was open. I understood when he said it that whatever the controller was, and whatever the scar on his chest was, and whatever the warmth at the center of his palm was, the three of them had been part of the same line, and the line had been opened, and the line was now humming, and Ray had not been told for many years that the line was his to keep. And on the palm of the Burning Man, somewhere above a planet that no longer existed, he had finally been told. The Burning Man brought us to a station I did not recognize. The station was old. It was the kind of station that had been built by a faction that no longer had a flag. He set us down on a docking ring gently, and he stayed for a moment in the open dock, the way a man waits at a door he is not quite ready to leave. Ray looked up at him. Ray said, "Will I see you again?" The Burning Man did not answer with words. He put one finger, a finger the size of a tree, against Ray's chest, against the scar, and the scar was warm for a second, and then he stepped back into the open dock, and he was gone. Hugo was on the station. I had not let myself hope. He was on the station. He had taken an escape pod off the Pendragon at the last possible second before the breach, and the pod had been pulled by a fold current to a place he could not have reached on his own, and the place was the station, and the station was the kind of place a man with the right call signs could ask for shelter without being asked too many questions. He saw me come through the airlock. He did not say anything. He just took the weight of my arm across his shoulder, because by then I had run a long way and stood on a planet that was no longer a planet, and my knees had finally found me. And he walked me to the wardroom, and he made coffee that tasted of iron, and he poured a third cup for Haruna, even though Haruna was not coming, because that was what you did. I sat at that wardroom table for a long time. I sat with the cup. I sat with Ray across from me, who had not spoken since the Burning Man had touched his chest. I sat with Cheney behind me, who had asked me to write the letter properly, and I sat with Hugo, who was pretending not to watch me, and I sat with the names of the ones who were not there. I sat with the file in my head. The file I was going to walk into an office on a planet at the end of a long voyage and put on a desk and say, "This faction, this mark. They are building things that wear the faces of better men. They are testing them on planets we have not surveyed. They are coming. They are coming, and they have a procedure." The Burning Man did not tell us his name. He did not need to. We knew enough to find him again if we needed to. We knew enough to know we would need to. Ray kept the controller in his pocket, and the controller stayed warm, the way the palm had been warm, and one night much later I asked Ray what the warmth meant. He looked at me, and he smiled, small, the first smile I had seen on him since the plane, and he said, "Captain, it means the line is still open. The line is still open. That is the part I want you to take with you. That is the part I did not understand on the plane when I saw the Burning Man pause for a heartbeat to acknowledge us and pay for the pause in his own blood. He did not pause because he was distracted. He paused because he was opening a line. He paused because he had recognized us not as men, not as crew, but as a thing his enemies had not built into the procedure. He had recognized that the 4 copies on the plane had been made to wear the faces of his brothers, and the older figure had been made to kill him cold, and the towers had been made to call the next wave, and the planet had been made to die if all of it failed, and none of it, not one piece of it, had been made to account for the small gray-haired man with the empty rifle, and the kid with the controller and the maintenance android with the tired voice. The procedure had not accounted for us. The procedure had been written to fight him. The procedure had not been written to fight us. That is the thing the factions who build procedures do not understand. They build the weapon for the enemy they expect. They do not build it for the witness. They do not build it for the small, uniformed people on the ground who are not, by any reasonable measurement, a threat. And then, when the procedure fails because the small, uniformed people on the ground did the one thing the procedure could not predict, which was to stand there and refuse to be killed in the proper order. I went to the office. I put the file on the desk. The men in the office did not believe me at first. Then they did. I will not write what they did with the file. That is in another report, and the report is sealed, and the seal is mine to keep. I will only tell you that the report set certain wheels in motion, and certain old debts were called in, and certain ships that had been quietly mothballed were quietly woken up, and certain captains who had been retired were quietly asked whether they would like to come back. I said no. I had a letter to write. I had 3 letters in the end, 4 counting the one Jeannie had written for herself and asked me to file in case. I wrote them. I walked them to the addresses myself, the ones I could walk to. I sat in living rooms with women and men who had not known their kin was on a survey patrol that had gone wrong, and I told them in my own words what their kin had done on the black plain of a planet that was no longer a planet. I told them the truth. I told them their kin had stood when the procedure expected them to fall, and they had bought, with their standing, 1 heartbeat of pause from a creature that had been built not to pause. I told them the heartbeat had been enough. I told them their kin had been the small, uniformed people who were not in the procedure, and the procedure had failed because of them, and the procedure had been a procedure for the destruction of a great many more planets than Cheney, and Cheney had been only the test. I do not know if I made them feel better. I do not think it is the job of a captain to make anyone feel better. I think it is the job of a captain to tell the truth, and to write the letter properly, and to keep the line open. The line is still open. I have not flown a ship since. Ray has. Ray went back out with the controller and he found work on a long-range vessel that I will not name here, and once a year on the anniversary of the plane he sends me a short message. The message is always the same. It says, "Captain, the line is still warm." I know what he means. I always know what he means. The burning man, the one who came down through the ash sky on the black plain, the one who paused for a heartbeat to acknowledge us, the one who carried us out of the dying planet in his closed palm, I have not seen him again. I have not needed to. I do not think he will come for me. I think he will come, if he comes at all, for Ray, when Ray is ready, and for the kids Ray is training now on his long-range vessel, and for the small uniformed people on the next black plane, on the next planet that is going to die. I will not be there. I am too old and my knees have given up, and the cold in my hands has never gone away. But I have a desk now, and the desk has a window, and the window faces a hangar where the quietly mothballed ships have been quietly waking up. And every morning I go to the window with a cup of coffee that tastes of iron because I learned to make it the way Hugo made it. And I watch the ships, and I think about the file, and I think about Haruna falling, and I think about the burning man's tired face, and I think about the procedure that did not account for us. And I think mostly about what Jeannie said, the second to last thing she ever said to me, on the warm palm of a being she did not understand and had no programming for. She said, "Captain, the procedure does not include us." I said no. She said, "Captain, that is what we are for." And then she had gone quiet in her amber color to write her own letter, and I had not understood her then, because I had been very tired, and I had been holding the line for a long time, and the wind on the burning man's hand had been very cold. I understand her now. We are for the part of the procedure that the enemy did not write. We are for the heartbeat the enemy did not budget. We are for the pause that costs the enemy his blade hand. We are for the witness that walks off the planet with the file. We are for the letter that gets written properly. We are for the line that stays open. We are for the small uniformed people on the next plane who will not flinch, not because they are brave, but because they have nothing left to flinch from, and because they know, the way Ray knew with his chest, before any of my instruments did, that some things are warm even after the planet is cold. The cold in my hands is a small thing. I keep it. It is the honest piece of me that came off Cheney. The line is still open.